Welcome to Weekends with Whitney. In today's show, we take you to the Battle of Baton Rouge. Fire! How they're keeping its history alive and why. Plus, DR.NICK helps us find some peace amidst the political chaos surrounding us this past week. How to build a bridge of understanding, even when we don't fully understand any of it. But first, Baton Rouge was just 45 years old when it was blasted, besieged, and burned by Union forces. It's almost unimaginable for those of us here today to think of that. But it's an integral part of Baton Rouge's 200-year history and part of what makes it what it is today. Chip Landry knows about the graves in Magnolia Cemetery and its grave history. Since 1852, hundreds of people have been buried here, but Chip and many others refuse to bury its history. The Civil War's Battle of Baton Rouge happened here, August 5th, 1862.
We do our best to give people a true version of history. We're honoring our Confederate ancestors, who were largely forgotten a lot of times.
His ancestors from West Baton Rouge Parish battled here.
My Confederate ancestor was a company commander in the 4th Louisiana Infantry. His brother was also in the 4th Louisiana, and there were 3 or 4 cousins in that regiment also.
As Robert Seal puts it, men didn't have many choices.
I think everybody either had to fight, hide, or run if you were living here then.
Robert's family had ancestors fighting on both sides.
My wife had a colonel in the Pennsylvania infantry named Carson. Now that's the Virginia side of the war. We had people in the 39th Mississippi, and they were SEALs and Wheats from New Orleans. If you have an old family, they had something to do eventually.
Today, his family shares some of that history by building boats.
We build models of scale of boats that operated up and down the Mississippi River during the American Civil War. North or south, it doesn't matter. We try to do something that's affiliated with Baton Rouge being the center of the world, bringing in New Orleans.
These men are also reenactors. They're part of the annual Battle of Baton Rouge commemorative ceremony, hosted by Preserve Louisiana.
It was a pretty gruesome war, so it's an homage to those people. You know, it's a complicated war, but unless we have these events and tell our stories, they'll be lost.
This battle was fast and easy by Civil War standards, but its after effects were long and difficult.
This was actually a short battle. It started about 3 o'clock in the morning when the troops left the Comet River and marched to Baton Rouge, and by early afternoon it was over.
But a lot happened in those few chaotic hours that sent shockwaves and devastation all the way to the White House. It was right here in what is now in Baton Rouge, the corner of North Street and North Foster, that President Abraham Lincoln's family suffered terrible tragedy. The sun had not yet come up, and friendly fire was exchanged between some Confederate soldiers and its Kentucky infantry. Killed in that skirmish was President Lincoln's brother-in-law. His other brother-in-law was also severely wounded. Then Just a few hours later, Union General Thomas Williams was killed. Confederates pushed back Union forces to the Mississippi River. With their gunboat, the Arkansas, they planned to crush the Union. But the gunboat didn't make it.
During the battle, it was on its way down to help General Breckinridge take Baton Rouge from Williams. The engines went bad in it, and the crew had to scuttle the boat. They loaded the cannons, ran them out the ports, lit it on fire, and it drifted down the river and blew up, and it sunk over at the Port Allen side of the river. Wow. So it's still there.
Hope of victory sank too for Baton Rougean Sarah Morgan. In her diary, later published, she wrote, "I had no words or tears. I could only look at our sole hope burning, going, and pray silently." Confederate soldiers were sitting ducks and came under heavy fire from Union warships. Nearly 500 Confederates were killed, wounded, or captured. For the Union, nearly 400.
I feel like it was kind of a futile battle. It's an undefendable town. It's completely flat. As long as you've got warships in the river, you control the whole town out to the suburbs because everything's flat.
Union warships flattened Baton Rouge further. Nearly a third of the city was destroyed to clear a path for their cannons. They torched the state capitol. Residents fled in fear. Businesses and homes were looted and burned by the Union because they could. This is one of the few homes to survive the Civil War. It's the Stewart Dougherty House, built in 1850. It was used by Union soldiers as a hospital during the war. Other than the Union forces, few in Baton Rouge remained. The city was nearly unrecognizable. Here is one more home that survived the Civil War. It's the Potts House. Nelson Potts built this. He was a premier builder at that time. He was also from New Jersey. And they think the only reason why the Union forces didn't torch this was because he was a Northerner. Union troops would occupy Baton Rouge until the end of the war, 2.5 years later. It became a military garrison for the Union Army and a staging area for its Navy. Some of the few Southerners who remained around Baton Rouge are represented in CHIP through reenactments.
My reenactment unit portrays the Louisiana State Militia. So we are what was left when all the young guys went to war. Basically, we were under 16 and over 45.
Okay.
And there were not a lot of uniforms left at that time, so we wore a variety of different garb. Civilian clothing, part Confederate, part Federal uniforms, whatever you could find to wear. And we're not the crack drill infantry units you see in different reenactments. We were the guys that hid behind the tree and shot into the rear of your unit and ran. For
Captain Landry, there was no place to run.
He fought through the whole war, got captured in 1864 after the Battle of Nashville, and spent the rest of the war at Johnson's Island, Sandusky, Ohio. He came around at the end of the war and offered all the Confederate officers there the opportunity to sign the Oath of Allegiance and be released immediately with transportation home. He and a group refused to sign it, and finally in July of 1865, the Federals just kicked him out and said, "You got to go home." So he had to walk home. And that took him 3 months.
986 miles, scouring for food and water every day of that exhausting journey. He was emaciated, but alive.
And it took him a while to recover.
He and all those coming home had to rebuild their communities and their lives.
After he got home, he became a school teacher. Then he became clerk of court over there for a number of years.
For others, Magnolia Cemetery is where they came home to. The headstones of Confederate soldiers are the ones pointed. Other military headstones are rounded. They share this once blood-stained soil with other locals, including congressmen, authors, artists, and more.
Unto my Lord, that I
What you won't find here are controversial Confederate statues, nor will you anywhere in Baton Rouge outside of a museum, which ensures in our capital city, one battle in Baton Rouge will never have to go to war over. If you would like to know more about what happened in the Battle of Baton Rouge, Sarah Morgan's book, A Confederate Girl's Diary, is a fascinating, intriguing read. You really get the sense that you are back in Baton Rouge during the Civil War. And still ahead, Dr. Nick. If the recent aggressive rise of the alt-right has you wondering what country you're living in, you're not alone. How to make some sense out of the madness as Weekends with Whitney continues. Foundation Repair, fixing your foundation problems for more than 30 years while preserving and protecting your trees. This has been a year of many unusual sensations for me. Some nights I go to bed and I go, what is going on? What is happening? I am so filled with misunderstanding of the world I've inhabited. Dr. Nick's going to help us out this morning. I say that because it's not just me.
No, it's not just you. And you know, when you said you wanted to talk about the state of the nation, you know, there was some resistance in me, but then I almost like immediately pulled out of it and thought, you know, we do need to talk. That's the problem. We're not talking enough.
Are we screaming?
We're screaming. Well, Whitney, I've been thinking a lot about this rage or anger and hostility that seems to be surfacing more and more and more.
Which I find very troubling.
Very troubling, but here's what I find perhaps motivating or positive in it. One of the things that I find myself often having to do in the office with people is help them find their anger.
Okay. Help
them tap into something that is still in our DNA as bad.
Okay.
Okay? All right, so once I can tap into that anger and I can start emoting it, then I'm very concerned with where it's going to go, how it's going to come out. Is it going to become rage, violent? Okay? Stay with me.
Okay.
I think what's happening in the nation is that there really is a whole lot of anger that has to do with lots and lots of transition that has been going on in the last couple of decades, okay? Major. I was thinking just the other day, I know it goes back a little bit. Remember not too long ago, the greatest basketball player was Chinese?
Right.
The greatest rapper was white?
True.
The greatest golfer was black? All right, that is in itself upsetting to the culture because we're not. It's like that's not supposed to be that way. Stay with. All right, so now we're having this immense kind of transition of an economy that's changing almost as fast, faster than we're ready for. The manufacturing has declined.
Certainly.
Lots of people out of work. We did have a black president for 8 years that I think with a lot of rage was stuffed at that. There just is this boiling of anger. And my point in raising it with you is now what do we do?
Ooh, right.
As a therapist, my job then is to try somehow to take that anger and rechannel it, calm it to the point that we can begin again to say, okay, that's there. Transition causes a lot of heartache in one's life and in one's nation. And remember, we're not very highly adaptable. And then one other thing I'll just add to that, I think we talked about it before. It's all coming out without robes, without masks. It's almost, and I don't mean just the alt-right or the KKK. I'm talking about everybody's coming out and standing their ground.
Right. What we used to hear in backroom chat rooms on the internet is now on CNN.
Yes. Yes.
Some people
and people are very bold.
Right.
And remember, the boldness comes through email and Facebook too. It's easier to be bold behind a rock.
Right.
But we're also seeing it now on the streets. I mean, Charlottesville was a major, major tragedy that we will have to live with for a long time because of all that anger and all that violence that erupted.
Well, okay, so I have a question. Because a lot of those are 20-somethings, okay? The people who are in that alt-right movement, a lot of them are 20-somethings. What do they have to be so angry about?
Well, that's a good question, and I suspect that it's again a fear that, I said not long ago, America's becoming darker and gayer. It's just changing.
And some people don't like that?
And well, I think that I do believe that there is some sincerity in a lot of European people, a fear that somehow they're losing their ground, their place, I don't want to say power because that's what we've got to shift.
Okay.
Is the power
but
base
I think you're right. They do think they're.
But it's just this enormous sense of we've got to get it back. Now, but put that up against an angry black crowd that is still fighting these statues that were built, in the early part of the century as part of the movement to deface the black freedom.
Right.
And all that was done, and that I think that's opening up. The knowledge base is coming out more and more. We're learning more and more and more.
Right.
And as we learn, we're becoming almost more and more violent with what we're learning, and we're not talking. There is no dialogue, and we're boxing people. So that if I say I'm a Republican, I immediately kind of get balked with, well, you must be this.
Right.
Or even to say that someone voted for Trump doesn't mean, I honestly don't buy that they're a racist. I think that a lot of people voted for him because they really felt we needed somebody strong to help the nation get back.
Yeah, boy.
Okay.
Yeah.
We can question it all day long, but we've got to be able to start listening to those different perspectives without the violence.
Right.
I don't mind the anger, but nobody's going to get violent in my office.
No, but I thought I heard some anger in our president this week when he was going back on the Charlottesville incident, and I guess that to me is I've never heard any politician talk like that. I've never heard him use that language or speak to the media or speak to other people with such disdain and such. And I think the civility in the conversation has just gone awry, and I'm troubled that some people think this is the new normal. That really that's how we really should all talk to people. And it troubles me that sometimes I don't know that I recognize this nation.
The question
when I turn on the news.
The question is he causing it, or is he emoting what's already been there?
I would say,
and he's opening it up to where it's now being allowed in. That's the real question. Is it a causality, or is it is it already emoting what's already there? I think there's been this anger brewing for quite some time. Quite some time.
Sure.
And
so is it good that it's bubbling up so that we can kind of talk? Some of those people don't appear like you could talk to them. I wish they could sit in your office and ask those 20-year-olds why they're so angry. What are they so angry about? And why do you feel that, your life is superior to anyone of a different religion or nationality? And were you born with it? What kind of birthright do you feel like that you were born into in this country just because you were born here?
I would like to do the same thing, but at the risk again of getting in trouble, I'd like to hear what maybe they are also feeling towards those that they think are taking advantage of the system. Because that's a legitimate concern. It's a legitimate concern.
Right, but
it's not something that should be waving Confederate flags with, but it's a legitimate concern. And then I'd like to hear somebody respond and say, well, let's talk about the welfare of corporations and what they're getting off the government. And let's talk about maybe what we're getting from these trade deals that we're hearing are so horrible. See, we're just not dialoguing.
Right.
We're not talking.
And then the links might be that there are more African Americans, let's say, on the social services dole of our government. But if you look at the numbers, no, there are more whites who are actually on it than.
I thought we had made more progress.
Me too.
It just seems like
I feel like we're going backwards someday.
Yeah, and that's where I feel like I have to be careful, because again, I'm coming at this, or at least I'm trying to come at this from a therapeutic point of view, which is to trust the process. Because in a process of getting better, becoming perhaps a more perfect union, we may have that move towards and then move back, and move towards and move back. I just believe, listen, Whitney, I come from Mississippi. I have Mississippi Delta, and then my mother's from the hills.
You saw
I
it.
understand, I grew up in that culture of white, kind of simple folk, simple folk. But there was but there was segregation, and what concerns me now again with the fact that we're not talking, it's like we're going into our own little ghettos. Oh. We're finding people that we know are going to be with us, and we go into our comfort zones, and so we're almost becoming more and more segregated when we need to be mixing and talking, as hard as it is.
Right.
We need to be breaking out of the you and I have said it. I'll often say, I just want my little circle where I'm comfortable.
But you don't allow yourself that, right?
But then I become in that vacuum of just thank you.
Right,
I mean,
right.
You know it's a tendency.
We've all
in
had
every
since the
group.
election difficulty talking about those type of things. It just
and families and families, brothers and sisters. I mean, I don't want to say we're on the verge of a civil war, but you have to start wondering what we can't even talk to family members as much as we could, or have again a difference of opinion, and maintain. And this is where I think perhaps what we ought to all start doing is having huge civic lessons. We need the rule of law. We need the balance of power.
Right.
We need, congressional oversight and people making laws that are just and changing situations that aren't and helping the economy. And
let me say something, because you were talking about being in the Delta, and I'm telling you that I had an Uncle Carl, and my Uncle Carl has been dead 20 years, and he was older. So my Uncle Carl, his ideas and his views on people who didn't look just like him were as rooted, cultivated, and narrow as the beautiful vegetable garden that he grew. If there was a Jew or a black person who came on television, he would turn it off. I never understood that. I mean, I loved him for the good things that we had, but those views, I never even understood. I thought that generation had died.
And it hasn't. And it hasn't.
And
yeah.
I'm troubled.
Yeah. And part of what I can only say to you is that it's all right to be troubled, not all right to give up hope. We are in a tough place. We're in a tough place. And sometimes, Whitney, I just don't have any answer other than I just fall to my knees. I listened to the Adagio for Strings last night by Samuel Barber, which is a real dirge. and I had it on in the background as I was watching Charlottesville, and I just was grieving and thinking, what is the matter with us? You know, what is the matter with us? But the one thing I want to make sure I'm clear about, it doesn't have to change you and I. I can still respect people who I see.
Right.
I can still respect every color, every race, every creed, every religion, and even bring out, tell me about what it's like to be Jewish. Tell me about what it's like to not have a job. A 60-year-old white man who's got a 5th grade education.
Certainly.
Talk to me. Tell me what that feels like instead of blaming and scapegoating. Talk to me. Let's respect each other in the dialogue and get off of get out from behind the rock.
Yeah. Well,
Fair enough?
Fair enough. I hope it will lead to some better conversations, which will lead to hopefully people understanding, as you said, where that's rooted, where that grew, why that anger is there so much, and surely a solution is a better solution out there is not just that we have separate societies.
Right.
The black people live here and the
Right.
Jewish people live here and the white people live here. I mean, that's not what we were founded on.
Well said.
All right.
Well said.
Well, thanks for
The struggle.
helping us, the struggle, and understand a little better about what's been a very difficult week.
And if this emotes anger, experience the anger and then try to figure out where it's coming from. Because you and I are not trying to intend anyone to be angry. I'm not trying to cause problems. Are you?
No.
We're trying to find out how can we resolve this to where we can live a better, more perfect union.
Yeah. We are a work in progress as a country, for sure. As maybe we are as individuals. But
Yes. Yes.
Thanks, Dr. Nick, for your insight today. More Weekends with Whitney after this. Atlas Foundation Repair, fixing your foundation problems for more than 30 years while preserving and protecting your trees. Thanks for joining us for today's show. Hope to see you back here again next week. Until then, you can follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Until then, we leave you with this.
I'm gonna do that again, right?